Hello, Econ. It's wonderful to see everybody today and hope you have a fantastic and wonderful time watching this presentation. Guess what? We are about at the end of this course. So that's pretty exciting. So last time we started to go through chapter 12, where we went through a lot of the information about like how much do we produce, when are we producing at a loss but still producing, when are we deciding to completely shut down, and how do we make these sorts of decisions. So throughout this entire course, we've had a very strong assumption of this thing called perfect competition. The idea that there's so many buyers and sellers in a market that they can't really control the price. What we're going to do in this last lesson is talk a little bit about what the other market structures look like. So if you decide to continue on with economics, which you should because it's a super totally fun thing, if you decide to take the next level of micro, these are some of the different perspectives that we're going to have to look from. What happens if it's in a monopoly? What happens if it's something with a really high barrier to entry, such as like the airline industry, right? So we're going to talk about those things by going through monopoly, monopolistic competition, oligopoly, and I want to talk a little bit about duopoly too. So let me just go ahead and share the screen and we'll jump right in with the chapter 13 material. Oh, so chapter 13 focuses specifically on monopolies. So what is a monopoly? Well, that's when only one person produces a good or service, right? And there's no close substitutes for that good or service. Let's think about all the way back, wow, a really long time, a depressingly long time ago, when Apple came out with the first smartphone. Well, they were a monopoly, right? Because there was no close substitute. They were the only person producing this good or service. Smartphones didn't exist. I still had like a flip phone where I had to click 4 times to get a letter in a text message, right? And then all of a sudden there were smartphones and the world changed overnight. And there was no close substitutes for it. So for that short period of time until everyone else was able to do their research and development and come out with their phones, Apple had a monopoly on the smartphone market. Okay, so let's think about what this means, right? If a good has a close substitute, so say maybe there was a different type of smartphone at the time, even if it's produced by only one firm, then it faces competition. But when it's the only firm that produces one good, of which there's nothing really else, then it's a monopoly. For example, monopolies aren't only one person has something in the world. It could be that there's only one option in your area. So for, I don't know, cable internet around here is Spectrum. Why is there Spectrum instead of also having like Spectrum and Comcast and Time Warner Cable and all these other ones? It's because they're granted a monopoly by the government. So the local government says, okay, you're going to be the person who provides the internet in this area, and that we grant you the monopoly. The reason why they do that is so that your front yard isn't torn up by 6 different companies laying lines. It's only torn up by one company laying lines, right? So monopolies, they can be geographic, where there's only one company that produces a good in a certain area. They could just be in the item themselves, as they are the only person who produces this type of item. They can be legally gifted, so it can be one where the government says that you're the only person who's allowed to produce something. But in these monopolies, that means that there's one supplier that is protected from competition, right? Maybe they have a patent, so no one else can produce it. Maybe the government says that no one else can come produce it without approval, and they just never approve anybody. Maybe there's a bunch of other reasons. So we call a few of these different types of barriers either natural, so are they just naturally the only person who produces this, ownership, or legal. Is there a legal framework in which they are the only ones allowed to produce this good or service? So let's think a little bit about their price setting strategies. Remember when we talked about perfect competition, they were a price taker, right? Whatever the market says your price is, that's the price you have to sell it at. You can't come with your bundle of bananas to the farmer's market where everybody else is selling bananas, and you look around and everybody's selling their bananas for 65 cents. You cannot in turn sell your bananas for 75 cents. No one will come to your stall, right? You're a price taker. You have to take the price of the market. Monopolies are not like this. Monopolies are price setters. If they're the only person who's producing something, they can set what the price of that good in the market is, right? Which means they might decide to produce a little less than what's socially optimal so that they can charge a little more and have more profit. So for a monopoly firm to determine the quantity it's going to sell, it's going to have to choose an appropriate price. And there's 2 different ways that they could set these prices. The first one is much more common and is what we typically see. This is the single price monopoly. And a single price monopoly says that a firm must sell each unit of its output for the same price to all customers. That's the idea of the original iPhone. I think it was like $699 if I'm remembering right. And it was $699 for everyone, right? No matter who bought it, that is how much it costs. That's a single price monopoly where there's one price that everybody pays. The second kind is price discrimination. It's the practice of selling different units of a good or service for a different price. And many different firms do end up price discriminating. So let's think about cable, right? It's the same cable lines to your house, no matter what service you decide to go with, but you can decide to select different types of service. There is some price discrimination. That also might be that, for example, during the pandemic, a lot of cable companies for low-income houses started offering cable service for extremely reduced rates so that students could still take classes. This is offering a different price for the same good or service for some sort of base reason. In that case, it was income. So let's think a little bit more about this. Let's think about the price and what that means for marginal revenue. Because remember, we always produce where marginal cost equals marginal revenue. So like I said, monopolies, they're price setters, right? Not price takers. They don't have to take what price is in the market. The reason is that the demand for the monopoly's output is like the market demand, right? There's going to be, when those first iPhones came out, there were some people that would have been willing to pay tens of thousands of dollars to have one of the iPhones if there were only a few. But also, if they put 1 million of them out there, the price had to be really low because there's 1 million of them out there. So to sell larger outputs, monopolies have to set lower prices. If iPhones were $1 million a pop, there are only a few people who would buy those $1 million a piece iPhones, right? So if they want to sell instead a lot more than just a few iPhones, they want to sell a few million iPhones, then they're going to have to change the price. In a monopoly, demand is always elastic. So people can walk away from a monopoly good. You don't have to have internet at your house. I mean, it feels like it's really a requirement, but technically you don't have to. You don't have to have an iPhone when iPhones first come out. You don't have to do a lot of these other things. So there is elasticity to this. It's not that someone has to have this good. So a single price monopoly never produces an output in which demand is inelastic. They don't produce to the point where people will be unwilling to switch their ideas, right? And if it did, it could increase its total revenue by decreasing the output. What do I mean by that? Well, let's talk a little bit more about what that would look like. Well, in our normal graph, actually, hold on, we're just going to skip over one so I can show you this, and then we'll go back to that last slide. This is noticeably different from the perfect competition model, right? If you go back to the perfect competition model, our marginal cost equaled our marginal revenue, and that was a flat line. We had a flat marginal revenue curve that just went across the screen. Here, what we find is that marginal revenue is decreasing, right? The more and more quantity of, for example, this is haircuts. We're assuming we only have one person giving haircuts. The more haircuts there are, marginal revenue falls. And it falls because this is not a perfectly flat demand curve. It's a decreasing demand curve. This looks a little bit closer to what we're normally used to. If you see something like this, you know it's not perfect competition. You're still going to have to figure out what of the other three it is, but this is a case that's not perfect competition because we see this downward sloping demand curve, right? So there's some different pieces in the price and output decision. The monopoly faces the same type of technology constraint as the competitive firms, right? Competitive firms in a perfect competition world still have to have machines to build whatever they're building, right? Monopolies do too, but they also face different market constraints. So you're always going to produce where marginal revenue equals marginal cost, right? Because that's where things are profit maximized. Because how much money I'm making for the next one is same for the amount of cost I have to make the next one. That's always going to be our profit maximizing point. Well, the monopoly sets its price at the highest level at which it can sell this profit maximizing quantity. So they're going to set their price for whatever they can get for this point because they are a price setter and they can set a price. What does that mean? Well, that means whenever you see a graph like this, there's going to be three pieces that typically look the same and one that can change. We're always going to have this increasing marginal cost curve. We're always going to have a decreasing marginal revenue curve and a decreasing demand curve. What we're going to do is we're going to go wherever our marginal revenue equals our marginal cost, and then we're going to do two things. We're first going to trace it up to the demand line. This demand line, that's the price we're going to set because that's what the market's willing to pay, right? So in this case, it would be $14. Okay. Then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to trace the difference in between the demand line and the average total cost line. Here we see that the average total cost swoop is below the demand line. It can be above it too. If it's above it, that means we're at a loss. If it's below it, it means that we're not at a loss and we're making profit. So here we're going to charge $14, but if we go to our average total cost curve, we see that our average total cost is $10. Okay, well, if it costs us $10 to make something, or for our average total cost, and we're selling it for $14, that means that there's a profit of $4. $4 times the 3 haircuts in this example, that's $12 of profit that this person's making. Now notice this is slightly different from things that we had seen before, because notice that our average total cost curve intersects marginal cost at the very bottom of the curve. That doesn't mean that that's where we're producing though, because the way that this graph just looks physically different. The fact that we have a downward sloping demand curve means that we don't have to produce at the point where marginal cost equals our average total cost. Instead, we can make our decision based upon our marginal revenue and our marginal cost. So the difference in between our demand curve and our average total cost curve, that's how much profit we make. If you multiply it by quantity, then you get your economic profit. Let's say it was up here though. Let's say our average total cost curve was up here and like what we actually needed was like $18. Well, if we needed $18 and we're selling it for $14, that means that we would have a loss of $4. $4 times the 3 that we're selling, that'd be a loss of $12. Remember, sometimes we might decide to operate at a loss. The reason why we might operate at a loss is because if we can pay our employees and put a little bit of money towards the rent, we want to do that as opposed to just shutting up and not having any money towards that rent at all. So there's this idea of price discrimination, right? In this case, we have one price. We're charging everybody $14. But wouldn't it be nice? So we see this demand curve. That first person would have been willing to pay $18. So wouldn't it be cool if we could charge that first person $18 and we could charge that second person $15 and then charge that third person $14? Like we charge them as much as they're willing to pay? Well, that kind of gets into the idea of price discrimination. And that's the practice of selling different units of a good or service for different prices. So maybe the price might be really, really high, but they offer a discount for low-income households so that the average price is a little bit lower, right? Then we would have a profit triangle for our high price, and we would have a profit triangle for our low price, or profit rectangle, right? So to be able to discriminate, a monopoly has to do one of two things. One, they need to identify and separate different buyer types. So this could be trying to figure out who's more elastic, who's more inelastic, who has more money than who doesn't. So this could be looking at income differences. This could be looking at geographic differences. Maybe the cable company knows that there's a disadvantaged neighborhood who may not be able to afford something. So if you live in that neighborhood, maybe you get a certain cost reduction, or maybe there's other things like that. So you have to identify and separate different types of buyers, but it also has to be for a good that cannot be resold. For example, let's say that iPhone charged millionaires $1 million and they charged everybody else $100 for an iPhone. What would happen? Well, they can be resold, right? So someone would buy their iPhone for $100 at their reduced rate and then sell it to the rich people for less than $1 million, and then it's a good deal for the rich people. So it has to be a product that cannot be resold, such as internet. If you turn on the internet to your place, you can't exactly resell it to someone down the street and be like, I will sell you my internet. You can't necessarily do that, right? So it has to be something that we can separate the types of buyers and something where we cannot resell this good. So price differences that arise from cost differences are not necessarily price discrimination. If it costs more to service a certain neighborhood, because maybe they're in the mountains and super hard to get to, and it literally costs more to set up internet at their houses than it does other people, then that's not price discrimination if we charge them a little bit more because there's a lot more cost in setting up their internet. Price discrimination is for some other factor besides cost. So there's two ways that they can price discriminate. One is among groups of buyers. So for example, airline tickets, right? You can buy, let's say Delta, you can buy basic economy, oh no, what is it called? Whatever their business class one is, and then like Delta one, right? So a Comfort Plus, haha. Basic economy, Comfort Plus, Delta one. So we have these 4 options. They charge different amounts. Let's say that you have an international flight to Spain and you are setting this up last minute. I only know this because I spend way too long thinking about vacations. So if you're a last minute trip to Spain and you decide that you're going to just go to the airport and buy a ticket, if you want Delta one, it's going to cost you about $10,000 to $12,000 for that trip. You get some fancy china on the plane, you get like a little area to sleep, and that's nice, but it's going to cost you a lot, right? On the other hand, we have basic economy where you're not really checking bags, you're just bringing a carry-on, and that instead might cost you about like $900. That's a big price difference, right? And they're able to do this because they know there's different groups of buyers. There's the business class people who their jobs are paying for it and willing to pay a little bit more. There's people who just want to get home to see their families and they want to do it for the cheapest cost possible. And there's just, I don't know, rich people, stars, movie people. Yeah, so that there's those that might also have a different price. So that's kind of a price discrimination by having different options where people can select based upon what group they're really in. And then there's also ones where it's among a unit of a good. So you can discriminate by groups of buyers or among units of a good. So this is the idea of quantity discounts. So if I go in and I buy one, well, I use Samsung, I don't use iPhone, but let's say that I wanted to buy a Samsung phone. I go in and I say, I would like to purchase this phone. I will pay you cash. And they're like, $799. Ugh, well, that's a lot, right? Let's say instead I'm a retailer and I go in and I said, I would like to purchase 6,000 Samsungs because I'm going to go resell them in my store, but I would like to buy 6,000. Well, then they'll be like, ooh, okay, well, you're not going to charge you $799. We'll give you a discount for getting that many. We'll charge you $699. Notice that there's a price difference and it's based upon the volume. That's something that people can do. It's a discrimination or price discrimination that's based upon the units of goods that you're purchasing. That's the idea of like buying soap 3 for $12 instead of buying $5 a piece, right? As you buy more, price goes down sometimes. All right, that was everything on monopolies. Let's think about monopolistic competition. So monopolistic competition is the happy little medium in between the two. That's the idea that there's a lot of different companies that might have their own small ability to control the system, right? And they have slight differences. So this one I always think about like pens, right? Let's do pens. All right, so we got the S gel, we got the Pilot G2, we got the Sharpie, we got the, what is this? The Papermate Inkjoy, which is actually pretty terrible, but hey, you know what? It works most of the time. And then I don't know, this clicky Inkjoy Quattro. All right, so we have lots of things in the pen market. That's cool. That's great. Does this technically count as a perfectly competitive market? Well, a perfectly competitive market means that everybody's producing the same good. It's the idea of you go to the farmer's market and everybody's bananas are basically the same bananas. But these aren't the same, right? Like this one is terrible and I don't like it. This one does multiple colors. This one is a Sharpie. This one is the best pen out of the group. And this one's like the free ones that they used to give out at my old school, so I have way too many of them, right? So they're all a little bit different. Well, monopolistic competition means that we're all kind of producing the same thing, but everybody's is a little bit different. Because it's a little bit different, I can charge a little bit more. I know that I have the really, really, really great G2 gel pens, right? And what is this, 0.38? Because 0.38 is really where it's at if you're going to do note taking. Though I use like 0.7 for the rest. Okay, anyways, I'm getting really off topic. These are by far the best pens. They know I am willing to pay more. So can they charge me $100? No, it's not a monopoly. They're not the only producer of pens. I do have other options. They can't charge me $100. They charge me $100, I'd walk away and buy the other ones. But if they instead charge me, if all of these are $1, but the Pilot G2s are $1.25, well, I might be willing to pay that additional 25 cents for what I think is a superior product based upon its small differences, right? Having that small ability, that small amount of power over your market to be a slightly different product, that's what we call monopolistic competition. So let's think about that. Monopolistic competition is market structures where there's still a large number of firms. There's still lots of people competing, but each firm has a small market share. They can decide to have a black pin, or they can have a blue pin, or they can have a multicolored pin. They can make small differences, right? And that gives them just the littlest bit of market power to manipulate their prices. That's why if you go down the pin aisle, which is aisle number 1 at Staples or Home Depot on your direct right in the front of the store, can you tell I've spent too long in retail? All right, so if you go do that, you know exactly where each of these are, but they're not all the same price. They're all drastically different prices. And the reason for that is because each one of them have a slightly different market power. And they know that people are willing to pay for their differences. Some people really like this type of grip versus this type of grip. Some people really like the black ones and some people really like the blue ones. Some people hate the Sharpie S gels because they are an atrocious pin that I should have never bought, right? So we have all these different sorts of things. And that means that there's product differentiation. These small differences are called product differentiation, right? And these firms, they have to compete on the product quality, which some of them fail at miserably. So they have to compete on price. Some of them are really, really good deals for bulk buying. Their price is pretty good. And some of them just have really good marketing. You know, there's other type of pins, like felt tip pins that you can use for permanent markers besides Sharpie, but what do we call them all? We still call them Sharpie, right? They have a really good marketing brand. In the monopolistic competition, firms are still free to enter and exit the market. There's not a legal barrier telling them that they can't. They still can do that. It's just they're slightly differentiated products. So with the entry and exit, there's no barrier to enter a monopolistic competition. I can start a competing pin company if I wanted to. Like, really, that's not my skill. I probably shouldn't, but like I could, right? I could go fill out the forms. I could set it up. I could buy some molds. I could make this. So firms in the very, very long run, since there's no barriers on entry or exit, can't make economic profit in the long run. They definitely can in the short run because they have some market power, right? But in the long run, what happens? Well, in the long run, let's say that I know there's lots of money to be made in the pin industry. Well, then I'll come along and keep producing pins. And the next person will come along and produce pins until eventually there's no more profit to be made. Now, what happens if people are losing money? Well, if people are losing money, then maybe Sharpie stops making terrible pins. And then maybe Papermate stops making the Inkjoy Quattro. And now maybe some of those losses are reduced because now there's more buyers for the remaining ones, right? So there's no economic profit in the long run. There's lots of examples of what these monopolistic competitions are. So audio and visual equipment, clothing, you know, there's only so many clothing brands, right? Jewelry, computers, sporting goods, lots of things, right? So let's think about their short run output and price decision. Notice that this graph looks similar to the one that we just saw at Monopoly, but what's the big difference? Look at this one, memorize it in your head. All right, let's go back. The big difference is that marginal revenue and demand are very steep for monopolies, right? It's very steep for monopolies. When they're the only person who produces something, there will be a few people willing to pay a lot. iPhones, if there were only 10 iPhones, there are some people who are willing to pay everything for one of those 10 iPhones. But if there's only 10 Pilot G2 gel pens, no one's paying $1 million for one of the 10 Pilot G2 gel pens. Instead, they'll just switch to something else, right? So notice that our demand curve is much flatter. It looks flatter. It's not all the way flat, like perfect competition. There's still some market power people have, but it's a little bit flatter, right? So we have this where our demand is downward sloping, and then we have our downward sloping marginal revenue. We also have our average total cost, which remember can either be low down here or it can be way up here where we'd be at a loss. It's a profit if it's below the demand line. It's a loss if it's above the demand line. Okay, what do? Same thing we did on the last one. So we always produce where marginal cost equals marginal revenue. So let's go there. Boom. All right, that's 50. All right, so we're going to produce, or excuse me, that's 125. We're going to produce 125. How much are we going to charge? Well, we have a little bit of market power. So we're going to take this 125 and we're going to trace it up to our demand curve. That's the price we're going to sell it at. In this case, we're selling these jackets for $75 because that's where marginal cost equals marginal revenue. We're selling it for $75. Now, how much profit are we making? Well, we have to compare this price at our demand curve to what price is required for our average total cost curve. So let's look at the difference. Let's keep drawing it down all the way to this average total cost curve. We see that we intersect with the average total cost curve at $25. That means our profit is the $75 we charge minus the $25 it takes us to make. That's $50 of profit. 50 times 125 is a big number, equal to this blue box. All right. Cool. In the short run, we make economic profit, and that's really, really cool. But sometimes we also make losses, right? Because I've told you, in the long run, there's no economic profits in the very, very long run. It's kind of short run decisions. In the long run, sometimes we have losses. And that's because sometimes marginal costs and marginal revenue are way down here and demand's down here, but average total cost is actually higher than what people are willing to pay for a good. So let's see in this example where the average total cost curve is lying above the demand line, what we would get or lose. So we go to the point where marginal cost equals marginal revenue. All right, we see that that's at 40, let's see, 40,000 customers connected. I guess we're talking about internet now. At 40,000 customers connected, let's go all the way up to our demand line, and we see at our demand line, what people are willing to pay and what we're going to charge is $40. But then let's trace to the difference in between this point on our demand line to our average total cost curve. Oof. Well, it costs us $50 and we can sell it for $40. That means for each one we sell, we lose 10, right? So it's 10 times 40, which I guess is like $400,000 that we're losing here. So that's going to be an economic loss. Remember, sometimes we will accept those economic losses though, because if we can still pay our workers, it's worthwhile to put a little bit towards our fixed costs as opposed to just shutting up shop, right? So in the long run, zero economic profits. And that's because people can freely enter and exit into monopolistic competition. In Monopoly, they couldn't, which is why monopolies, they can make profit forever. But monopolistic competition can't, because if there's money to be made, a new company can come in. And if there's money being lost, people can leave, right? But in the end of the day, always go to where marginal cost equals marginal revenue and then take through the steps. Step 1, find marginal cost equals marginal revenue. Step 2, trace to the demand line. This is the price that you are going to be selling it at. Step 3, trace from the demand line to the average total cost curve. Notice it's not necessarily at the bottom of the average total cost curve. The difference in between the price at the demand line and the price of the average total cost line, that's going to be your economic profit or loss for that one good. You have to multiply it, step 4, by quantity to get your total economic profit or loss. Done. If you follow those steps, it will save you like 6 questions on the final. All right. So in the long run, we make zero economic profit. As firms enter the industry, each existing firm loses some of its market share because being a pilot G2 gel pen is less special when there's 500 competitors than when there's one competitor, right? And the demand for the product can decrease. The decrease in demand decreases the quantity at which marginal revenue equals marginal cost, and it lowers the maximum price, right? So the more and more people who are competing, the less I really can charge extra for my type of good, right? So as new firms enter, the price and quantity are going to have to fall until price equals the average total cost curve, which is going to equal the marginal revenue curve, is going to equal the marginal cost curve. Eventually, over time, it's going to look like our perfect competition model, right? At least a little bit more like it, and we're going to have zero economic profits. So what's really the difference in between monopolist and perfectly competitive markets? Because we've talked about this a lot, and monopolistic competition is a very special thing. So it's not really a monopoly, but it's not perfectly competitive either. Well, there's 2 key differences between monopolistic competition and perfect competition. I do believe that I asked a question about one of these on the final. One's going to be the idea of excess capacity. Excess capacity is when a firm it produces less than the quantity at which average total cost is minimum. So let's go back. Let's see right here. Average total cost is at a minimum right here. Well, that's normally where we would produce for perfect competition, but notice we produce less than that. In this way, it saves us some losses. In other ways, here's the bottom of the average total cost curve, we might actually produce over that capacity, right? So we have the ability of excess capacity in monopolistic competition where we're not always producing where average total cost is at a minimum. The second thing is markup, and markup is where our price exceeds the marginal cost. It might only cost me 75 cents to make this pen, but I sell it for $1.25. That's a markup that I can have. You don't have that with other things, right? Because our marginal cost equals our marginal revenue equals our price in the perfectly competitive world. All right, last one. Woo, we're getting there. Oligopoly. Oligopolies are also a different special type of structure, right? This is when there's only a few firms who produce something and there's some sort of natural or legal barriers keeping new people from getting in. Let's think about airlines, right? I just like airlines. So for airlines, there's Delta, American, United, Alaskan Air, Spirit, JetBlue. There's a few, right? And there's major legal barriers. You can't just say, hey, I'm a plane company now. Like, yeah, it's going to cost millions upon millions of dollars of research and time and connections. And then you're going to have to buy flight paths. And then you're going to have to get the FAA to approve all of it. And you're going to have to talk to the government. And then it's just, it is very difficult to become an airline. There are barriers that prevent the entrance of new firms. I can't just go say, I am an airline now. You can't, there's no Plemmmons airline. So there's a small number of firms that are competing. Typically, what economists think of when they're talking about oligopoly is that it's less than 6 firms, but it varies a lot depending on who you ask. And these are just ones where you have a lot of control over the prices, right? Because you're only competing with 4 or 5 other people. So you can't charge $1 million a plane ticket, but you can charge like $400 a plane ticket. There's still going to be some differences, like a flight on Spirit is drastically different than a flight on Delta, right? Spirit has like the hard plastic, but it's a lot cheaper and you can get flight, and the flight attendants are always hilarious. But Delta, you have like the little plugins to be able to charge your phone and a screen where you can watch television. Like there's differences in what these flights are like because they have, market power. Because they have market power, they can adjust their prices. And because there's only 5 or 6 people competing in an oligopoly market, can be more, can be less, then there's going to be wide variation in what these market share looks like, which means there's wide variation in price. That means that they can actually make a lot of money in the short term. But in the long run, when we're talking about hundreds of years, there's still no long run economic profits. So if there's only 2 firms, by the way, we call it a duopoly. Duop, baby, duop. I keep thinking about like that song every time I say that from like the 1950s. Anyways, duopoly. Duopoly is when there's only 2 firms and they're directly competing against one another. So one of them can't control the entire market, and one of them can't charge $1 million for their phone while the other one charges 300. Like you can't do that. So they still have to make decisions based upon what the market's like. Now, there's a couple things about oligopolies that are really important to think about. The first is interdependence. With a small number of firms, each firm's profit depends on every firm's action, right? The profits of American Airlines are extremely dependent on if United opens up a new route or if Delta starts servicing certain areas, or if Spirit starts allowing people to have free bag checks, right? The things that their competitors are doing can drastically change what's going to be the profit of a firm. So American Airlines would be very affected by these decisions of others. That's an interdependence that we see with oligopolies. The next one is a temptation to cooperate. This is actually why we have like, what is it? Sherman laws? Essentially, antitrust law started in the 1930s because a bunch of gas stations got together, and every time a new gas station opened, they'd wait for the new gas station to open, and they'd say, let's drop the price. All of them would call each other up and be like, all right, we're dropping the price to $1 today. All of them would drop the price. New guy can't keep up because, they're brand new with one place, and then they ran out of town very quickly. Apparently, this is wrong. Like you can't collude like that. Collusion in between businesses is illegal, right? So this is temptation to cooperate and form cartels. The idea of cartels means that there are very few people who are producing something and they work together to try to maximize profit and keep out competitions. Not legal in most ways. In most ways, they're not legal in the United States. All right, that's it. Congratulations. You've officially made it through all the economics content of micro. It's been a wonderful time. I've really enjoyed having this space with you, and please let me know if there's anything that I can do for you at all. I am only an email away or, a visit by the office. All right, everybody have a wonderful day, and I will talk to you soon.